We would invite all who care to joining us in standing with the recitation of the Lord's Prayer, followed by a moment of silence. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
It is now 7 o'clock. Sherman City Council meeting is called to order. Please join me in the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Be seated. Roll call, please, Mr. Crum.
Mr. Robb.
Here.
Mr. Roberts. Here. Mr. Gates. Here. Mr. Martin.
Present.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Here. I will now entertain the motion to dispense with the reading of the journal from May 16th, 2022.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Martin to dispense with the reading of the journal from May 16th, 2022. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yeah.
Mr. Robb.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts. Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
That motion passes with 6 votes. Super majority. We now come to the time for public comment. If anyone has a comment they would like to make before City Council this evening, you can make that comment at the podium by come up, state your name and address, and make your comment. Or if you'd like to reserve time later on in the agenda to make comment during legislation, you can come forward and reserve that time. So that would be the opportunity for you to do that. We do have Mr. Jay Sell from Aspen Energy Natural Gas Aggregation Program here. But let's see, Mr. South, if we have any public comment from the general public first, and then we'll have you come up, okay? Sounds good. Anyone have any comment, public comment?
So then, South.
My name is Southwell. Many of you refuse to talk to me or hung up on me on the phone. I tried to stick to this. I expressed
Put your
opinions.
name and address, please.
Southwell, 10 Summit Street. I expressed opinions about water, cops, and heroin and messages to Shaq, leaving my personal information in the state. Since then, I have been led from my home, kidnapped, set up for prison, denied defense, and railroaded into the court system. My friends are the same. All while they destroy my evidence here in Shelby, the form of public records and taped interview. Shame on you guys, man. Once again, this judge subpoenaed me from my home after that, and Fetzer and the guy who stole my motorcycles, Darrell Hall, tried to harass me into an argument by teasing me about my stolen motorcycle. And just to go me in so they could rearrest me and throw me in prison for what I was initially set up for. Also, I would die there, I'm sure. No disturbance occurred. I did not. Fetzer was not even allowed to claim victimhood on that, and he lied to me about who the victim was. He said the prosecutor, and he said the girl with the thing on her head. They fabricated that disturbance just to return an innocent man to a prison cell that I was set up for. This after years of terrorization by the SPD, with conspiracy, attempted murder, arson, entrapment, refusal of service, dereliction of duty, and terror as their tools, as well as a convicted violent felon to terrorize me. Any way he wanted. He could do anything he wanted because he worked for the Shelby Police Department. If I hadn't gone major about this, I would have been dead or arrested a long time ago. It's about the same thing. I demanded an investigation from the state and federal agencies. More importantly, I implore the true heroes of defending my God-given constitutional rights from the people who hate our freedom and liberty and work to destroy it like the people in this room. CH and Thai, Direct D, chili, we need a big bowl of chili. Brian Young, Tara B., Stephen Janis, Long Island Audit, Lackluster, Disorderly Product News, now Ohio J. Serial Hammer, Mass Accountability, San Joaquin Family, Chi-Town Sue, Friggin Media, Joe Cool, Bully Back Audits, and James Freeman. Y'all should be ashamed of yourself, all of you. What you did to me and my family. My mom made noises when she screamed in agony when you set me up. I'd never heard her make before. I just gotten Social Security and I'm a disabled vet. My back is screwed and sleeping on for 10 months, concrete and steel. You gave me pleasures I hope you want to get yourself. Excuse me, I have to take a shower being around you all.
Excuse me, Mr. Gray, I did not catch the gentleman's name.
Got the rest of my stuff for you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, for your comment. South Hall.
South?
South.
Okay.
Any further public comment?
We didn't want to follow that.
My name is Bernie Brewster. My wife and I live at 10.5 Summit Street.
My name is Michael Hubbard. I go by Mick. I live at 49 West Tucker on the extension. We are neighbors across the back alley. And the back alley is our issue here today.
Yeah, so basically, we're representing a bunch of neighbors who live right in that area between Summit and West Tucker, who share that alley that runs down between the two streets. I do have a petition. I don't know if I can give that to anybody if you want to see it, that has all of our neighbors signed. And I just want to read you what the petition says. That we, the undersigned, are a group of neighbors with homes on Summit Street and West Tucker that share an alley that runs between the two streets. We have been increasingly concerned with the growing amount of activity happening the length of this alley at all hours of the night. There are several people who walk up and down the alley, cutting through private property and looking and pointing at all of our houses. This behavior is increasing with some instances of theft. There has also been sighting of suspected drug use. We are concerned for our private property and the safety of anyone around. This alley is extremely dark, and we are all requesting that a light be mounted on the utility pole. I have the number of the pole, 3B1085, behind 10.5 Summit Street. Perhaps not just this pole, but maybe more up and down the length of this alley, which I see there are 3 that go down the length of the alley. Light is a major deterrent to crime, and the mounting of lights could save the city of Shelby money and potentially reduce police patrols and/or arrests in this area. The concerned neighbors in this vicinity will also be able to sleep better at night and feel safer. My wife and I lived there. I've been with her 10 years now, and so 12 years we've lived there. Mike has lived in that house since the 90s, right? Fortunately, we personally have never had any problems, and over the years we have seen there's a house down at the end of the alley that sits behind 24 Summit. I don't know what the address is or anything of the sort. But
Chief, do you know what the address is up there at the end of the alley where the,
In the 41?
no,
What's your address, Mike?
I'm 49.
Okay.
This is the house that goes at the end of the alley.
yeah, it's not.
Talk about Ashes?
It's you can't get to it from Summit no more. So that's why I'm here, because I have been broken into. My garage was broken into. Well, I shouldn't say broken into. I left the walk-through door unlocked. The door that's toward my house. My main garage door was locked. 3 or 4 years ago, I go out to work. My grandkids' go-karts were stolen. Lots of tools, saws. The only thing I got back was the go-kart that's damaged because they wrecked it out on Mickey Road. So that gentleman went to prison, Jeremy something. But anyways, here recently, all the activity, this is the alley that actually Virginia Swanger had paved years ago. It runs behind her house.
Sir, we're seeing it right up there on the screen.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
So I was told recently that house up there that the occupants are staying in it has no electricity, no running water. If that's true, I can't verify that, but that's the word that we got. if that's true, I don't see why the city would let someone live in a house like that. Of course, they're unemployed, they don't work. I just recently had a push lawn roller stolen that I had sitting outside of my garage. Like Bernie said, they walk up and down the alley all hours of the night, morning, because they don't have to get up and go to work. So somebody close to me has a lawn roller that they purchased. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, you know, we've seen people walking up and down the alley. We're talking 12:30, 2 o'clock, 2:30, 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 4:30 a.m., pulling wagons, pulling carts. They've all got backpacks with their hoods up on their hoodies. I'm sorry, this is Shelby. You know, if it's 2 a.m. and you're walking up and down a pitch dark alley with a hoodie up in the middle of summer, you're up to no good. And, you know, fortunately, I'm sorry, Mike has had some problems. Fortunately, my wife and I have not. We keep a camper parked right there on the back side of our house, and that utility pole is actually right there at that rear bumper. And, you know, there's very little like that there, and it just invites this kind of behavior. And we have seen increased many more people walking up and down this alley.
New people frequently going up to the end of the alley.
Yeah.
And it's just, there is police traffic, police vehicle was up the alley yesterday, but it's like that type of citizen is never gonna be arrested because they know they can't they're not gonna lose a job or anything, so it just seems, and I guarantee you, if I accidentally left my garage door open one night and sat inside waiting for somebody, because someone would come in, if I just accidentally left it open, I'd be back down here on the wrong side of the court. And we don't want that to happen.
You know, nobody wants any of that to happen, and, you know, we see just so many people, there's children that play in this alley, granted, not in the middle of the night, but there are many children down towards the farther end of Tucker near Walnut. One of our neighbors said she opened up the windows in the back kitchen facing the alley about 7 a.m. and saw what she believed was the drug use I mentioned in here. You know, this is stuff, my idea is just put a light up, because if it's really bright, they're not going to be walking around doing this, not nearly as much, I don't think. So that's what we were.
I've lived on West Tucker since '93, and I still want to say it's a decent neighborhood, living up on the extension, because it's a dead end. So normally we know the cars that come and go, but the cars that go up and down that alley to the end are different vehicles all the time.
All the time.
And it's increased in the last 3 years, twofold.
Mr. Gates.
Mayor, to let the gentleman know, the house down at the end was up for sale for back taxes. Carl Schrader did buy that. Carl is well known for buying houses and flipping them. I happened to run into him, met him at the hardware store a week ago, and he is in the process of evicting the people who live in that home. And once the eviction takes place, then he can get in there and do what we know that Carl does best. So that will address that problem at the end.
That's good.
Mayor, I would ask that the clerk of council accept these gentlemen's petition.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
See, at one time, that alley you used to be able to go up the alley and come out to Summit. And then it was reopened, and then it was reclosed. I don't know the purpose of that, but I've lived there long enough to know that that's happened.
Yeah.
Mr. Guy.
I can address that. At the time, there was a survey done on this property
Yeah.
here, and turned to find out that there is actually a city alleyway that comes from Summit back down to that alleyway.
Yes.
Where the garage sits on top of it right now.
Yes.
That's in the process of being removed,
Okay.
and once that's done, then we can open the alleyway back up, and that, it's better for safety forces and everyone, so. give,
Okay.
access through there.
Probably a lot easier to pull my camper around there too, instead of backing it all the way down the alley. So, I mean, our biggest concern is the light. I don't
That's
know
what
if
we're
it's
asking for,
possible.
is a security light up the alley.
Just a street light on the utility pole.
The pole's already there, the electric's already there.
And there's a lot of us that use this alley, and, you know, I mean, just for no other reason than to have, you have street lights all over city streets, and a lot of us as citizens on both of those streets do use that alley very frequently. Our garage access is right there, so. That's the only way we get back to
So-
our house.
If I may change the subject, do we know what's going on with Tina House? You know where it's at, Charlie. 50 or 47 West Tucker. When Tina passed away, Jason had to leave. The backyard is growing like this. They come and mow the front yard. Someone comes and mows the front yard. Last I heard, it was up for a sheriff's auction, but there's no signs or nothing in the yard stating this. And that's right next to me. And when the people come up the alley, they cut through my yard between my house and Tina's house. There's like maybe 12 feet between there.
Yeah.
And so when they're coming up the alley and they want to go over to the street to the other notorious house on our street, I won't mention no name, but they either cut through that yard there or Tom's. Chief, do you know Tom's last name? Anyways, it's
Yeah.
51 West Tucker.
Yeah.
So my house gets the brunt of the traffic on both sides as they come down the alley and cut over to the famous house.
Well, thank you so much for bringing these things to our attention, and we will certainly do our best to take action. Please know that our office doors are always open, my office, police, and the utilities office, and we would, once we know these things, it is our practice to try.
This forum works better for us because we both work till 4:30.
I appreciate the spirit in which you.
Unlike the people we're talking about, they come down all day long.
Right.
But we appreciate your time and listening to us.
And Mr. Gates, if you do run into Carl again, and he goes by our house where that camper is, if you think about it, tell him I'd love to meet him and have a discussion if that's possible, because I understand he is a good guy, and I've just never met him. So that would be good. That's all I want.
So,
I'm your councilman.
Yes.
My phone is in my pocket all the time. Feel free to call me with any of these issues.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Mayor, I request that the clerk add this matter to the agenda under unfinished business, on future agendas.
Mr. Crump? Anyone else wishing to address?
Hi, I'm Jay Sell. I'm at 47 Timber Oak Court in Powell, Ohio. I've worked with the city for a number of years on your natural gas aggregation program. Thank you to Mayor Shag, thank you to council for having me. Just kind of discuss briefly and answer questions about the legislation that's going before council tonight on the natural gas aggregation program. I want to talk a little bit about the spirit of the legislation from my perspective. The market is at a really tough point right now. Volatility is very, very high. And in a normal sort of circumstance, we would have legislation that could be brought through with contract pricing and terms that would be able to stick for at least a night. To be able to have that read before council and decide on something and then execute a contract the next day. The market moves so much right now that it's really not even really possible to present a price one day and be assured that we're going to be able to lock it in the next day. So the market moved about 40 cents on Friday. Today, when I left the office, it was up 62 cents. So per MMBTU, which is how they measure the natural gas on the NYMEX. So that would be for the July prompt month on the NYMEX. It changes all the time. What the spirit of this legislation, I believe, is to allow the mayor to, when he sees favorable terms, to be able to negotiate and execute the contract on that. We do have multiple communities that are going to be aggregating together with you that we service with Volunteer Energy who filed for bankruptcy. So it left quite a few folks without a supplier, you guys being one of them. So I think it's important to be able to have these communities be able to execute all together at the same time to increase the buying power, get a better offer for everyone, and this legislation would allow the mayor to be able to execute at the right time under those circumstances. As part of the legislation as well, there's the PUCO renewal included in there as well. That's something we just need to do every couple of years with PUCO, is file a renewal application with them. And there's a Columbia Gas of Ohio information agreement that would allow suppliers to pull your load data and be able to map it and put together an executable offer. So that's what's included in the legislation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have about the market, about the legislation, about anything that I can help with. But that's pretty much the gist of it.
Mr. Gates?
Maybe Mr. Sell knows the reasons for Volunteer Energy's bankruptcy. I mean, was it just, these things just happen? This is a tough industry?
A little bit.
Was
of
it corruption? Was it incompetence?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. Just financially, they didn't, at the end of the day, they didn't have a strong financial backing. I think it was certain investments that they made, and it didn't work out well for them. So in today's market, more companies are filing bankruptcy. Volunteer was a huge partner of ours for years. They did a great job on the aggregation here in Shelby and with other customers of ours. So they were a good name, did a good job. It's just, it's circumstance of the market being so tough, and some things didn't go super well for them behind the scenes. But at the end,
Mayor, my wife and I had chosen a gas supplier long before the city aggregated. And lo and behold, not about a week or so after Volunteer, the notice came through, our energy supplier said, guess what, we're bankrupt. And, so it's, I suppose, the nature of the beast at present. So the question I have, I know this legislation's not up for debate right now, but since Mr. Sell is here and I've got a question, when I read through the legislation yesterday afternoon, it struck me as being vague, and I think I understand now why it's vague. That, it says, to authorize you to enter into contract with a recommended natural gas supplier. That's in the title and then down in section 1 and 2, section 1 as well. So help me to better understand how that recommendation is going to work. And I'll preface that by saying one thing that I'm somewhat concerned about is whether this language may be an improper delegation of our legislative authority. But anyways, tell me how this is going to work.
Tell me how this is going to work.
yeah, no problem. So we've got multiple communities who were helping negotiate during this time with how this would work would be that we would go to the suppliers. We've been doing this behind the scenes already, but in order to get executable pricing for Shelby and the other communities as well behind Columbia Gas, we need to get the information agreement from Columbia Gas of Ohio signed. It takes them some time to kind of get that data, then scrub the data, map it, to be able to tell that we're only servicing eligible customers within city limits. It's the same with the other communities, and then we negotiate the price as low as we can. The ambiguity on the supplier would be to give us multiple options. So as we go and the market changes daily, hourly, every minute, that we're able to negotiate and have multiple suppliers to be able to utilize. I think that's why the wording is as it is.
Mr. Mark?
If you could refresh my memory, the folks within the community don't have to go with the designated supplier, and there's no cost to the city. Is that correct?
Yes. There's no opt-out fees, so anytime anybody wants out, they can get out. They will have a 21-day period at the beginning where they can choose to opt out of the program. They call a number or send something back in the mail. And then as part of our negotiations with the suppliers, there's no opt-out fees for anyone at any time. So, yeah, they can get out if they want.
Mr. Mark?
So people that were in with Volunteer, how are they kind of defaulted, everyone's opted out, now people have to opt back in?
Yeah, people are opted out to the default Columbia Gas standard choice offer right now. So they're on a choice offer that's NYMEX plus $1.60 is what the offer is. So it's whatever the market closes at plus $1.60 per MMBTU. It's their standard offer, and with market rates so high right now, it's not great, okay? Do they have to opt back into it? No. As long as they haven't moved away from the standard choice offer, when we send out the opt-out letters, they'll be sending out a letter notifying them of what the offer is. If they want out of it at that point, they can get out. If they want to enter the program, they just don't respond, they don't do anything with it, and they're entered into the program. Folks that did pick an alternative supplier are able to get back into the program, they just have to call. They can call the supplier with the number right on the Columbia bill, or they can call me, and I could assist personally on making sure that folks want to get signed up that can.
I do share Councilman Gates' concern about the, obviously, delegation of our legislative authority. This, of course, is though a unique circumstance. I wonder if in the section part of the resolution, we might be able to add an annotation that the mayor, upon entering into that, at the next council meeting, or in writing, make council members aware what exactly the terms are that were entered into. And the reason being is not necessarily accountability, because at that point it's signed, right? But in a matter of, we're gonna have constituents reaching out to us saying, what is this? And so it would be nice for us to be able to, at the earliest time, know exactly what the city entered into effectively on our behalf through this legislation. I don't exactly know how to word it, but I would, I don't think about it, I guess we're not discussing it. I had time to think about it. I was about to make a motion, I was like, whoa, we were not even on it. So anyways, but that would kind of, I think, alleviate at least my concern to make sure that we're in the loop. You know, it'd be one thing for it to be entered into and all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, we get it through a utilities report or something like that. I wouldn't want to see that, so. I think this is definitely a unique situation, and this is definitely a unique answer to it.
Two things cross my mind since we're in this question and answer. The first time, the authorization came just to enter into this aggregation program. I remember that, Mr. Sal.
I'm pretty
I
sure.
don't believe we had any, I'm just talking, I don't think we had any figures or reporting to council what those figures would be, or did we?
I don't believe so, John.
Mr. Martin, maybe you
We did.
It was two separate pieces of legislation. We opted into the program, and then they came back with the actual rates, and then we approved you entering an agreement with those rates.
Okay, you got a good memory. All right, so then, Mr. Sal, then, putting that language in here in addition to what may be here should not in any way affect the intent of the legislation.
Not at all, in my mind. It'd just be letting council know what you did so that they can tell people about it and be aware. Makes sense.
Any further questions for Mr. Sal? Thank you for coming to this.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you, John.
Any further public comment this evening come before council? Mr. Crum.
To speak on behalf of the Park Board, we do have two members of Park Board, Dave Heineken and Dave Downs, here tonight. Maybe we might want to reserve some time during that camera legislation in case you may want to speak in then.
Mr. Kenneth, Mr. Downs, would you like to reserve time just in case your input is needed?
Yes.
Or
Yes,
requested?
please.
Okay, and would you give us your addresses, please?
My address is 3089 East Smiley Avenue.
Okay, Mr. Downs?
Mine is 67 Parkwood Drive, Shelby.
Okay. Okay. All right, very very good, we'll have that time reserved for you then, if we have your input needed. Alrighty, hearing no other, or seeing no other public comment, we'll move forward then to reports from standing and special committees. Community and Economic Development Committee, Councilman Baldwin.
Thank you, Mayor. The Community and Economic and Development Committee did meet a few hours ago. Kathy Webb, the Director of Memorial Library, wanted me to pass along a couple of things with what they're doing. They're preparing for the 125th anniversary of serving the community. So on the 22nd of July, they will host a car show and an ice cream social. So that's going to be exciting. Here, closer on the schedule on 13 June at 5:30, they're going to host a Richland Source community listening event at their pavilion. Next, on the discussion, we talked with Christina Drain of the Shelby Historical Preservation Committee. They're having a meeting this Friday at 9 a.m., their monthly meeting, and in addition, they wanted us to pass along that the Ohio Historical Connections building doctor is set to come here to Shelby in October. So as that gets closer, we'll update you on that event coming to town. Then Jessica Grimmon, our Economic Development Liaison, she said applications will soon be initiated for the facade improvement grants that are coming soon. In addition, the CIC will meet this Monday at 7:30 a.m. One of the things they're going to be discussing is the building on the northeast corner of Main and Gamble. The topic of discussion is what they're going to do, the next step is for that building. That is all I have at this time, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. McLaughlin in regard to his report? Hearing none, we'll move forward then to Public Works and General Operations Committee. Councilman Rob.
The committee met on the 24th, and most of the discussion that we have now, we will see is in the past tense. City Hall main entrance closed the week of the 23rd. It's still closed. Hopefully within the next few days that will be open. Mayor just indicated tomorrow. Mr. Geis is still working on the timing for the charter legislation and amendment with the Board of Education, Board of Elections, I'm sorry. It's important to get that to the Board of Elections at the proper time to avoid having to have a special election and additional costs that go along with that. So we're working towards that. And y'all have seen the job description, I hope, for the code enforcement officer and legislation. We have that tonight on the agenda for that position. Also discussed were surveillance cameras and the possibility that the Park Board would be coming to council with that issue, and they're here, and we also have some legislation concerning that. You also see some legislation dealing with stormwater retention maintenance for property owners and subdivision regulations concerning stormwater will be coming soon. And last but not least, pollinator field was planted at Reservoir 2 by Randy Eisenhower and the FFA volunteers. And to quote the mayor, B City status is kicked up a notch. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. Are there any questions or comments from Mr. Rob in regard to his report? Appreciate that. Safety Committee, Councilman Roberts.
Yes, sir. Safety Committee met on June 1st, and it's kind of a unique meeting. The only recording body there was Chief Combs, but we did have some health news, and we did have some fire news come out of it. In health news, Mr. Gates wrote an article. Seems there's an uptick of a new variant of COVID, and it's kind of trying to make its way across the country. Seems to be more contagious, but resulting in less deaths. So, it's just a cautionary situation where, it's not gone away, it's here, and everybody's still got to be careful with that. In interviews for the Director of Nursing, I that time going on.
It'll be tomorrow and Wednesday.
There you go. So, and then, just to mention in the fire news, we're gonna have a application, we're gonna consider an application tonight for an ARPA grant, First Responders Wellness Recruitment Retention and Resiliency Grant, that's resolution 34. Chief Thompson thinks it's maybe a long shot, and there's some really strict rules on how you can get this grant. So, but as we said before, we try to ask for every dollar we can get. If we get it, great. If we don't, you can't get it if you don't ask. So, now on to a little bit of police news. The second resolution tonight that we will deal with in my report is resolution 35. That would allow the mayor to use state purchasing plan for the police radios. There was a issue, the radios that we talked about before became unavailable all of a sudden, so in a scramble, Chief Combs did his due diligence as he always does and came up with a different company, Motorola radios, and so they have state purchasing plan, so we will, if passed, we will move on with that. Third resolution is 36, and that's a grant application. If passed, will help with the cost of the new police radios. So, the price ticked up a little bit, and so, again, anything we can get to help with these projects is helpful. So, and the last resolution, 37, Mr. Rob said earlier, would authorize contract for surveillance cameras in the parks. And that's really all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Roberts in regard to his report? All right, hearing none, we move forward to reports.
If I could, we, the parking committee also met, and while I don't have an actual report, I just want to let everybody know that we have met for the second time, and we met on the 24th, and Chief Combs gave us a big packet of homework to look at with the ordinances, and we're going to have to run through all the ordinances and see what we need to do to make our parking situation downtown better.
Okay, thank you for that additional report from the ad hoc parking committee. All right. Now we'll move forward then to reports of city officials and looking at the agenda and the time. I really am not going to give a long report this evening. We did finish up our cleanup days Saturday afternoon. I think things went well. We do have some more branches and limbs to pick up, but our crews will be getting those here. Maybe a little bit today, but for the first part of this week, it's going to be our goal to get those all cleaned up. But I want to thank everybody for their hard work on that. Some volunteers helped us with a couple citizens that needed some assistance, and Mr. McLaughlin's son and a friend of his volunteered in a pickup truck, and so we need a little bit more of that next year for sure. So we'll try to arrange that. But I think overall things went well with another cleanup season. So that's just everything else has been pretty much typical mayoral business since our last meeting. So are there any questions for me or any comments? All right, let's move forward. And Mr. Crum, Director of Finance, report, please.
Thank you, sir. I also don't have a massive report. First of all, thanks to all of those who helped out without a couple of days. Nice to get away. Most of my time was spent trying to figure out the numbers for our legislation tonight, so we can talk about those at that time. That's really all I have for a
Okay. Mr. Crum. Any comments or questions for Mr. Crum in regard to his report? All right, hearing none, move forward then to Mr. Eister, Law Director.
I'll follow your lead and make a brief report, Mayor. Apologize for my tardiness this evening. Other than that, routine business, no report.
Thank you. All right. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Eister? Move forward then to Mr. Geis, Project Coordinator, just recently returned from a nice vacation. So, there you are.
As you can see, the West Side Square was complete. They started East Side Square today. That will schedule for 60, but I don't believe it'll take that time. And as part of that, though, also working with the Bicycle Days Committee, they have tentatively come up with the chief's approval, a parade route coming down Wilson to Macewood Avenue to that square. Half of it will be done at that time, so they'll be able to get through on the west side of that square and then use the regular parade route. So that's what's in process right now, so we'll update that when it gets closer. We got a pre-construction meeting this Wednesday for Blackmore Commons with that contractor. And don't have a starting date yet on the paving program, but one thing that it will also affect us, the railroad crossings at Main Street and Smiley for CSX will be redone the week of June 20th. So we've had to make some adjustments to the detour for the East Side Square. So they basically come in and say, we're gonna do them now, or you're not getting them done again until who knows when. They're in bad shape, so we're gonna try to do everything we can do to help accommodate everyone. It's gonna be a tough few days for everyone, but we'll do what we have to do. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Geis. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Geis in regard to his report? Hearing none, we'll move forward then to new business. Is there any new business to be brought before council this evening? Hearing none, move forward to unfinished business. Future use of Main Street Fire Station, there is nothing new to report on that. The former ice plant property, Ms. Gribben is working with a businessman that has shown great interest in this area, so we're working through some I guess plans and designs that are in the minds at this point, but so hopefully there'll be good news to report in the near future. The Mama's Pizza, we had discussed the lease for the Mama's Pizza, and so through doing a little homework, and Mr. Gates was in the City Hall this afternoon, there was an amended resolution number 28/2007, which authorized the Community Improvement Corporation to enter into a lease agreement. And so we have been using that same framework through these following years. The first one was like for 8 years. And so this has gone through some different nuances, but we have seen this as a continuation of that lease and the signing of that lease to where we are today. And it was, the most recent lease was signed by Mr. Penwell, the president of the CIC. So that's where we are. That's the instrument that has been used from the authorization in 2007. Are there any questions on that? All right, thank you. Is there any other unfinished business we brought before council?
You want that removed from the agenda?
I think we can remove that out. Very good. Thank you.
The Mama's Pizza.
Yes, sir. Pardon. Yes, sir. Any further unfinished? All right, let's get into the stack of legislation. Mr. Crum.
Ordinance number 8.
There's some correspondence that's here in the agenda.
Oh. Thank you. Correspondence from the Board of Revision of Assessments, is that what you're referring to?
Yes, sir.
All right. So the correspondence is a report of the meeting of the intent to declare an alley running perpendicular east of East Main Street between lots 565, 567, and 85 in the city of Shelby, Ohio. As you notice from the correspondence, that the commission voted to recommend the council vacating of that alley. That was passed, and so the bottom line is the Board of Revision of Assessments recommends the council the vacating of the above reference alley.
Mayor, I move that the communication from the Board of Revision Assessments dated May 19, 2022 be received and placed on file.
Second. We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Martin that the report from the Board of Revision of Assessments dated May 19, 2022 be received and placed on file. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Robert.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
That motion passes. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Mayor, I would request that the law director prepare legislation to vacate said alley. I will be happy to be sponsor.
That's been duly noted.
Any co-sponsors? Gates.
All right. Any other unfinished business? Now let's get into legislation. Mr. Crown.
Right, ordinance number 8, 2022, amending chapter 1486, stormwater management, section 1486.16, maintenance of stormwater drainage facilities and control structures of the codified ordinances of the city of Shelby, Ohio.
Move for first reading?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Martin for the first reading of ordinance number 8, 2022. Discussion? Mr. Geis?
I made it second.
Oh. Mr. Gates. That is a second by Mr. Gates. My bad, sorry. Mr. Geis, can you kick this off first?
So there's been some issues over the years of, like when a new subdivision was built or business, and then there's the stormwater control facility on maintenance. So what this would do is identify, first off, is when they build it, you know, they submit data on how it follows our ordinance and so forth. But then afterwards, once it's done building, you know, there's really no checkpoint to make sure that is. With this ordinance, they would have to submit a document from the engineer stating that it does what it says it's going to do, and the size and so forth. And then we have there'll be a plan for how they're going to maintain it, and avenues to make sure that we keep them so they do maintain it. And however, come up with a way of who is responsible for this, who owns this, and our right ability to go on and inspect it when we need to. So that is a lot of the big of it. I think it can be very helpful for us in the future.
Mr. Gates.
Mayor, I'll start with the attachment, the proposed, the draft agreement, the template. The first paragraph says, "and the city of Shelby hereinafter referred to as the community." Well, that's not the case. It's referred to as the city of Shelby all the way through. The next paragraph talks about tax map number. I don't believe that Richland County maintains numbered tax maps as it did. So I know this template came from Summit County, and I'll prove that point later on. So that's a phrase that needs to be looked at. Going down into item number 2, right, the last paragraph, the owner shall provide a maintenance plan for each SCM. My question is that maintenance plan a public record?
Mr. Gates.
I would assume so.
Is it then filed with the city?
Mr. Gates.
Correct, so they would have to provide their maintenance plan with their final data showing that they built it the way it is with the map from the surveyor and so forth. So then we would have that plan on file so we could make sure that they consider it.
Clearly, if it's on file, it's a public record.
Correct.
Looking at page 2, letter C, item number 2, next to the last line, Ohio State University Department of Food, Agricultural, and Biological Engineering, and Summit Soil and Water Conservation District. That should be, of course, Richland. The last line in item 6, under C, nothing herein shall obligate the city of Shelby to maintain the SCMs. To say I almost did a cartwheel when I read this would be an exaggeration, but this has been the bugaboo for years. Who's responsible? This makes it very clear. The page 3, item 5 at the bottom, upon execution of this inspection, Main Street should be reported in the county clerk's office of the Richland of Richland County, Ohio. I believe that should be the recorder's office, and let me say why I think that. Summit County is one of 2 counties in Ohio that has a county charter. They may well have eliminated the position of recorder and combined it all into the clerk's office. So that should be changed to recorder there instead of the clerk's office. Looking at the legislation itself, looking in section 1, paragraph A, right in the middle, again, the property owner shall assume full responsibility. I like that. We go down to the paragraph second up where it talks about something that is owned by an association of homeowners. HOAs, be careful, you might get what you ask for there. That's a judgment, an editorial comment I'll identify in a second. The last paragraph, second line from the bottom, the city will require all these. The word city there should be capitalized. The next page, paragraph B, right in the middle, where it talks about assessment of property owners in accordance with the Ohio Revised Code. The Ohio Revised Code has a different assessment procedure than does the charter of the city of Shelby. We don't want to do, if the voters were smart enough to establish an assessment process for us, we don't want to default to the Ohio Revised Code. So, Mayor, at this point, I will move that the Ohio Revised Code be deleted and in its place be inserted Charter of the City of Shelby.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Martin that in the paragraph B, about the very middle of that the words Ohio Revised Code be deleted and replaced with Charter of the City of Shelby. Any discussion on that motion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
That motion passes.
And my last comment, Mayor, is the 5th line from the bottom, the word city be capitalized.
Thank you.
And just again, this is an outstanding piece of legislation.
Very good. Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Marks.
Not to be completely disagreeable, but I, as is tradition, I'll give this a first reading, but I definitely would like to have further conversations around the basis of this. It seems to me this is a potential further impediment to people investing in our community and building within our community if they have to go through another step. And I just want to make sure if we're forcing them to go through another step, it is indeed a step that would have helped us in the past with past developments. And I'd like to know exactly how so. It's one thing to say, oh, this will be great for us in the future. Well, how would this help us in the past? With a potential problem that we have, or there's an issue that we weren't able to resolve because we didn't have this in place. And I want to know that before I put any additional regulation on people within our city. I want to ensure that the regulation is necessary and would have actually fixed the problem that existed in the past. Now, as opposed to, well, we'll just make our life easier in the past. Well, okay, so made this life a little bit difficult. We had to work through a little more hoops. But at the end of the day, if we're forcing people to go through a pretty strenuous process to build and develop within our community, we better dang well be certain that it's going to fix issues that are a consistent bugaboo in our side. And so that's, I will definitely want some answers to that effect from the administration before the second reading. But of course, as is tradition, I will more lenient with the first reading, but definitely would like to hear that before giving it my vote in the second or third reading.
Thank you. No other discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Ordinance number 8, 2022 passes its first reading.
Ordinance number 9, 2022, enacting section 230.08, code enforcement officer of chapter 230, mayor of the codified ordinances of the city of Shelby and declaring an emergency.
Move that the requiring that an ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Robb, that the rule requiring that an ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended. Discussion? Mr. Martin.
Just the reasoning for the emergency piece.
As stated in section 4, deemed to be an emergency is to provide for the immediate preservation of public peace, property, health, and safety of the city of Charlotte, Ohio, and for the additional reason that is immediately necessary to have a code enforcement officer initiate their functions during the favorable weather of spring and summer. So those are the reasons you need an emergency. Mr. Rob?
A simple explanation is if it's not passed as an emergency, we won't have anybody in that position until fall. And that's about the time when that whole job is gonna start winding down a little bit. Summertime is when the most need is.
Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Nay.
That motion passes.
Move for passage of the ordinance.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Robb and a second by Mr. Roberts for the passage of ordinance number 9, 2022. Discussion. Mr. Gates.
Mayor, we had some discussion, you'll recall it, in personnel, finance and personnel. And obviously, one of the questions has been decided whether this position is going to be classified or unclassified. It's listed as classified. The writing of job descriptions is an administrative function. But at this point, do you consider that this position will be seasonal?
It's stated as the employment status would be part-time intermittent. And I believe that would translate into seasonal. That's 1,000 hours or less per year, per calendar year. And in speaking with the finance director, and I think we've had conversations, the part-time, intermittent, seasonal approach probably makes the most sense to see how this works in its initiation. And, you know, this may evolve into a full-time job, I don't know. But at least this will give us some footing and traction here this summer and see how it goes. Mr. Martin.
Sorry, it says unclassified, right? Unclassified?
Yes.
Okay, someone said it was marked as classified, it was just,
Yeah.
it says unclassified.
Yeah, unclassified, yes.
I'll make sure that I wasn't missing something.
Mr. Gates.
Mayor, you cited about being seasonal intermittent. Were you reading from the ordinance? Did I somehow miss that?
No, sir, that's in the job description.
Okay, so you do have the job description.
Want someone else to?
I would find it helpful to read the job description if you've got it.
Mr. Martin.
Mayor, I move council recess for 10, 15 minutes to give us a copy of the job description and to
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Martin and a second by Mr. Roberts to recess. Do you think 10 would do it?
I said 15 for an intentional reason. I'll
15.
leave it to your imaginations, what else you need to do.
For 15 minutes,
Whatever
we'll
we need to
recess
do.
for 15 minutes for sure. Alrighty, so that is a motion made by Mr. Martin and a second by Mr. Roberts. Discussion on that. Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
Mr. Rob.
Here.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
That motion passes. We'll recess and reconvene at 8:15.
Yes, yes, please.
Tony.
What exactly did Sal say?
Hey,
You guys picked the
did you invite him?
That's why Ed didn't get the show. Wow. I tried.
Yeah, what's your,
You know,
what's the story? You're not even looking out for us.
I tried. I gave you guys a few out there.
we're getting time and a half right
We booked it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna give you time now. Don't worry. Don't worry.
About clicking it. My contract says double time after 8, so I'm
Oh.
just letting you know.
They showed
What do you mean?
works perfect.
If I may ask,
Oh,
He did that to make it look better for the cameras. Yeah, that's it.
stepping back on my heel on the step stool, sat down, happened to put my hand down too, and I got a little, the initial x-ray were a crack in the radius, right at the base. I get a re-x-ray again Thursday in orthopedic.
do they have to do anything, or just kind of heal us like that, or?
Yeah, they're gonna, she's gonna, they're gonna check it
Yeah,
again
that,
Thursday.
I'm sure that would
I just went to the emergency room.
Actually, yeah, that would be fabulous
Because
because,
maybe that's what happened, and it's like, maybe I ought to get it.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a crack there. So,
Mr. Mayor, I'm gonna move that we consider the legislation you're here for after we're done with this one.
Yeah.
We can get out of here.
resolution 37. That'll help too with the appropriation ordinance too. because
Yeah, I guess you just say, if it pleases the fellow members, let's move that legislation.
Okay.
That's fine.
I had a question for park board guys. Yeah. Because I know we've talked about it before, but, you know, I'm out playing on playgrounds with my kids. The north, Southern North Way, that thing probably is old.
Oh, yeah, not even that anymore, I don't know.
Is there, like, and I know that it costs a fortune to have a third party come in.
20 years ago it was 100,000, or 15 years ago it was 100,000. When I first started, they looked into dredging.
I could do that.
I brought a guy in 2 years ago. $7,500. Then, that's just the beginning. I gotta get all these agents involved. Since it's a water,
County just
fresh
said I
water
need new
stream
railing.
comes through the,
$6,000.
goes into the Shelby water system. They probably have to build some type of damming
Oh,
to let the stream go through so that it can catch all the silt and all that.
that's great. If instead of the kids coming in the middle of the night vandalizing, they just got 5-gallon buckets. Pull muck out of the bottom.
Here's your job.
I mean, that's what we ought to have to do for community.
We just drill some holes in the buckets to get the water out, and, so it's just really.
I forgot. Clean water.
First one,
We looked at, we
we've looked from time to time at grants.
How the APF can move forward.
They thought maybe
What are you
they
doing?
could sound. I don't think we've been kind of gun shy.
Here now, finally?
Although probably eventually,
Here now.
yeah.
It's just gonna fill in.
Yeah.
Swamp.
Yeah.
With the stream going through on the
Yeah.
other side, unless it's the south side.
They're,
Yeah.
Restitution. That's all your best.
Yeah. It's close to that now, I think.
I'd say it's pretty shallow.
On the north side where the cattails are growing.
I thought in the middle, in where we stopped.
I was like,
Borrow one of John Medley's kayaks.
So I actually think it's closer to 7 feet, but there's a mild dispute between what's actually was on.
We never have this kind of excitement at
Shelby
Shelby City Council until you guys show up.
good night.
Especially the property line goes, you know my neighbors, the red,
Oh, yeah?
their
Okay.
garage.
Yeah, I was.
Right up to their garage.
You should train this dog. You
That
never use that.
all my side yard on that, and part of their driveway actually is in my
I'm
property.
not fixing it. We'll tear down everything that's bigger than 2 stories.
When we took
It's
out
cheaper than fixing the house.
asphalt run through, I invited them over, and I said,
Yeah, you think you guys have problems? He's breaking his toys out of the car.
I'm going to be putting barriers, tearing this out, illegally, I know, but like when, you know, like, park the second.
Oh, yeah.
So we marked it off.
Physical drift, so if you're going to the ladder, trying to bring it back down.
So we're ready
Really,
from
if
going
you float
forward.
music for this water,
So we came to that.
it's out, so it keeps extended.
Yeah.
So
I think
we're not
I'm
flowing water, so
way
it's,
more.
it's, you know, but I don't know how much.
It's fun.
Hydraulics do that?
Yeah, just,
So it's like you got seals.
they said, well, they said it's sealed, or it's easy to check valve in there, so they said, sure, if you're locking every time, so that, now, they said, could you get that checked?
Yeah.
So it could be this,
Cheap, yeah, or, yeah.
which,
22 years old, you know?
yeah, it's no different than a wall lift or something like that, it's, we're out.
Whereupon my
So
wife
we'll
asked the
see.
real estate closing agent to leave the
So
room.
there's, yeah, this has to be tested.
I said,
We have, like, they only let
she
you
said, you're gonna.
go out there, you work it, you leave. So, not allowed to be anywhere
And
around.
that was the first lesson the guy learned about being married.
They said, I think.
Doesn't matter how lawyerly you are, it doesn't matter what the proof legal course of action is.
Two words, that's what he said.
Yeah.
Yes, here.
Great.
When
How long's it been since we used that ladder?
when we sold that, I'm like,
We
man,
used it at, Main Street, you used it.
I was getting ready to walk up out of that.
We used it most,
Really?
most for business.
So the house is in, it's my name, and it was really just for simplicity, where, the amount of paperwork I had to sign of, you do understand, you know, it's in your name, it's legally half hers. Yes, I did, like, it's.
Break your toys. How much is a miller? How much is that truck?
That truck right there, total.
Is that right?
That's a small
How
one.
much?
No,
We got married and
Who
the house
makes
that.
them?
there's various
Mother
different
was
stuff, they're all
part of
custom.
it.
So there's various, you buy a chassis and then you buy a body.
Signed
Yeah,
it,
got it.
There's two
found
pieces.
notary.
Like utility box.
Yep, same thing, you're buying chassis and then buying that, and it's
No dower in Maine.
like a big platform like Mansfield
There's a
has.
few states like
for,
You know, as
two
they say,
point five
in
million or something.
Ohio, one person can buy,
But
it
you-
may take two people to sell.
You look at, let's say you like that ladder truck, $1 million, okay, like we've been on Two Brooks roof, I don't know how many
My
times.
mother-in-law,
Marriages.
CLID, MTD,
my mother-in-law was a police dispatcher all the time.
they pay for itself.
Yeah,
It's no different than a fire truck.
Yeah.
Fire trucks,
Husband keeps on breaking it.
base price $350,000. Say, a couple houses.
Yeah.
So we should sell this because we have to use it all.
There are
I see you saying that, look at your house.
There are fire.
Are you in danger? Like,
Is it really?
I tell you legal protocols, but
The company you
He came in and took his
So
lawnmower
here's
like,
another one. If you pay the tree.
his lawnmower,
They
They'll
say-
come. If you don't pay it, they won't show up.
No, it's free.
Well,
If you get a call, it's free. If you didn't pay, you were paying for the time they get the alarm, you're paying for gas, for fuel,
Oh,
man hours.
Did you buy a
equipment,
copy?
They have a whole set
Are
scale.
you here?
I was in a checkbook every
It's-
So when I sold my house on number 4 Dale Avenue, after we were married, two signatures.
So they really are the mom.
It was funny, it said,
They said
the
there's
deed
no
for this
first place
property
in
in May
Pennsylvania
talks
where
about
firehouses are allowed.
going down the stone wall.
You get a phone
It
trade.
becomes a competitive.
Well,
It's got competitive market, yeah, it's money.
they're making big.
Some lane down to so-and-so's landing, I think, oh, great, but glad I wasn't a surveyor in Maine.
I like that.
Our first house actually.
So what?
I'm gonna have somebody
Somebody
Now you're working on it.
like everybody's
drove into mine, my wall was
You know,
my other
real
neighbor's
shame.
garage, it was a common wall. It was actually a common wall. It was our legal area.
That's what it
Things
is.
happen.
There's a lot of places show a lot, side by side,
Any news on the tennis?
well, we have a nice space between us.
Still waiting on the,
Midway break, but no.
the engineer to come up with it.
Because then that goes through, right through the middle of the trees, and back. We share all the trees.
I'm doing a divorce right now, and the property line goes through the middle of the pond. There's a big family squabble and all that, like it broke off.
It did make sense.
Here, the property line like in the middle of the pond. That's all. I did have one that was through the middle of the septic tank one, too.
Yeah.
The septic was, they put the septic on the other property line house, and they shared it. Those are
Just small piece when you take it out that way.
Especially when you don't have room to put your own septic.
Oh, yeah.
That turns real interesting real quick.
With the fish on one side, cross
You
the
do that for it,
line on the other.
You do that for us.
All
You keep it straight high. Your white
That's
shirt.
my old client Harley Reiser, when he did that with a deer.
Introduce yourself.
We litigated that for 8 years.
Shelby City Schools.
He shot and killed the deer,
You know
and the
about
deer
the
went
ranch.
on somebody else's property, and went and retrieved it. So he was charged with finding stuff, with permission of the owner. If you retrieve it, even though you shot it elsewhere, that's illegal.
Yes, exactly.
So he got a restitution order from Ohio DNR for $27,000 for illegally harvesting that deer.
I know, that's what I'm worried about.
So we litigated that all the way to the Supreme Court and back down.
It's
Pretty
pretty,
interesting.
I tell you, the latest,
Go with the word or.
this morning, Jerry dropped this off.
A conjunctive versus a disjunctive or.
I got
I
it
would like that.
That is, Eve lunch or something on Saturday. We have a last minute reservation at the restaurant.
Great day.
Oh,
Oh, that's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Water all over the playground. And in the restroom, water all over.
I think our part of this turned into shade.
Ripped the sink off the wall. Didn't break it.
It was by Georgia, but I think that's.
Tore the coupling off the water line, so the water was just shooting out all night long.
It's an endless wall, right?
What I work school.
That's about how I ended up on it. So one band.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is.
There's some way we can rig up the iPad and it would explode off.
We looked at that. Yep.
Yeah.
They both did. And the sink's right there on top of the.
Right,
We looked at that, that's where we stopped.
Mickey Mouse.
Nobody been to jail and saw that.
At least I haven't seen one of those. I have no want to do some follow-up with that. Call them again. That's correct. That is correct. We noticed that. We noticed that too. Mm-hmm.
All right, it's 8:15. Council comes out of recess and continuing discussion on ordinance number 9, 2022. And my apologies that the job description was not in your packets. Further discussion on ordinance number 9, 2022. Mr. Martin.
I think it's definitely an important position. It's going to be very, very important that the right person fills that position. Could go very poorly very quickly. So I know that's an administrative function, but just a word of caution that we definitely work on hiring the right temperament. And even, even in the job description, making sure that we emphasize that a little more than just the enforcing piece of it, but the applying of the common sense will go a long, long way. So.
Duly noted and agreed upon. Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yeah.
Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Ordinance number 9, 2022 passes.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. McCall.
if it's okay with the city council, I'd like to bring up resolution number 37, 2022 at this time so that the park board can get on their way when we're done with that.
Is that all right with everybody? All right, let's move to resolution number 37, 2022. Resolution number 37, 2022.
Resolution number 37, 2022, authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Safety to enter into a contract on behalf of the Shelby Park Board of Commissioners for the purchase and installation of a camera surveillance system from Vendor Communications, Inc.
Move resolution taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Gates to pass the resolution number 37, 2022. Discussion? Mr. Rob.
I see a quote here from Vendor Communications that covers the installation of those cameras, except for what's noted in the installation details, where it says the customer is responsible for the networking, terminating network connections, blah, 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 on down to buying computers and providing some network connections at the police department. Question is, who's going to be responsible for those expenses?
Mr. Cohen, did you?
Yes, I didn't see those, but I know that the park board is willing to handle the ongoing maintenance and such. I don't think they would have an issue covering those costs as well. It's my take from the park board meeting.
You hear from the park?
We have no problem. We have a vandalism problem. We think this will help that, or at least help restrict it. And the police chief is very involved in this, and it was his assurance that this will help, so.
Mr. Rob.
Well, the problem is that these cameras have to have some system to plug into. It's internet or whatever. They're just not gonna send a signal back to the police department, but there's gonna have to be some wiring done on that end so that they can terminate.
Chief, do you want to speak to that on this end of the terminating point?
So there's a couple things going on. One is gonna be a network switch, and the other one is gonna be the communication. These are high definition cameras, so they use a lot of bandwidth. And through discussions with, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Ensman, but through discussions with Mr. Ensman, I think the idea was that the city is going to run fiber to those parks. And we will probably take care of the switch and the housing for the switch. So that'll come out of the police budget. Not the fiber, but we will take care of the connection. We currently have a problem right now with our video system. We are in dire need of upgrading a video server. And so when we looked at upgrading that video server, we had this project in mind. That is a $4,000 server. That server's already been purchased, and we worked with Bender and our IT contractor to make sure that server side we can handle that extra video.
I think Mr. Ensman, you want to say something about the fiber,
Sure.
perhaps Omni Fiber as well?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, we've had this discussion with the administration about the infrastructure that's needed, and fiber would be needed for these cameras. We do have fiber in town. We have a network between all the municipal buildings. There's multiple ways of getting the fiber to these locations. One, we can do it internally. Two, we can do it with a fiber company. We are entertaining a broadband company by the name of the Omni Fiber, and they're discussing giving us quotes to run the fiber. As they run fiber throughout the community, they run fiber to the parks for this purpose.
Mr. Rob?
At what expense?
We're waiting on those quotes. I do not have a dollar amount in front of us now, but there could be an expense to this, absolutely. There would be. I know Omni Fiber, we're still waiting to hear back from them on the cost.
I don't want people to misunderstand me here. I have no problem with the camera system. I think $46,000 is a very good price for that. I just want to know what other expenses are going to be involved in that. You know, if you're going to run fiber and network connections on that end, there's going to be some expense over and above this. So.
Well, running again fiber as a utility, if we do that, we would bear the cost of that as a city under utilities, and then switchgear and so forth with the police department. I understand your concerns. Excuse me, gentlemen, if I may enter into discussion just for a few moments. Chief, you want to give a little bit about timeline that we're dealing with on this?
So I got a call Friday from Bender Communications, late Friday, notifying me that they had just been notified of a price increase at the end of the month of between 6 and 10%. They think that's probably going to be around the 6% mark, but they were notified of a markup at the end of the month based on kind of market conditions. So I notified the mayor, and that was, we just wanted to communicate that to council, that the price is only going to go up. I feel pretty confident in all of our discussions that the city recognizes the infrastructure. The city would be bearing the costs of getting fiber there. We've already made the plan and upgraded server space. So we will host, we will bear that expense, we will bear the switching expense. The only thing that we had any concerns about was if there were upgrades to the cameras, the city would not be probably maintaining any upgrades to those cameras that were necessary. The cameras do have a pretty long life. They are a little pricier, but compared to most other camera manufacturers that have a recurrent cost, these are an upfront cost, there is no recurrent cost. And once you buy the license for these cameras, you only pay one time for the licensing. That's why, one of the reasons why it was attractive to us as a project. And we also want to time this, I think, along with Black Fork Commons and all of the kind of the big upgrades that are going on there.
Mr. Mark?
Well, it said that your first payment should always be your mortgage and your second payment should always be your insurance on it. And I think this is pretty much insuring the $1.8 million that we're going to be investing in the Black Fork Commons. So I definitely support it. My only question is, considering the price increase, do we need to do this as an emergency?
So I had that conversation as well. I think most of you know I don't like emergency legislation, I just don't like it. My recommendation to the mayor was no, and then I got the call Friday and panicked. So vendor communications said they will honor that price without a PO as long as we present them with a letter to intent. If we give them a letter of intent that we're going to purchase that once that 30 days comes available, they will purchase the equipment now based on the letter of intent.
Mr. Gates?
Mayor, about 6-8 years ago, we had a significant problem up at Marvin Memorial Library. That was during the time that I coincidentally served on the board. We had problems with drugs. We had problems with people using drugs in the restrooms. We had problems with people using and selling drugs in the parking lot and in and around the library, the pavilion, what have you. We made the decision to upgrade our very old, very gray, black and white, scratchy video system to state of the art. We put in 21 cameras in and around the library, and our drug problem there disappeared. Where it went, I don't know. I'm sorry for the people where it went, but it wasn't on library property. Obviously, we have a very serious problem with vandalism in the park system. A couple weeks ago, I opened up the paper and there were pictures of and I remember opening up the paper and seeing it and saying, dear God in heaven, I could not believe how bad that vandalism was. And you know, it's better if a park system can spend money on, you know, the pool and on swings and on lawnmowers, but the situation is that this is what we have to do. Unfortunately, we're in this situation. There's cameras in and around this room even as we speak. I get that. So we need to do something. I think this is a good plan. The question I have is reading the letter that Mr. Crum and talked about the places where they're going to put the parks in. My question that I wrote here is not McBride and why.
I can speak to that. Primarily, I'll take the hit for that. That was kind of my oversight. Had not considered that McBride was actually part of the park system for whatever reason. When I started looking at this last year, I remember reading in the paper the vandalism at Veterans Park, and I know the problems at the other parks. I just simply had not considered it and added it into this when we started the discussion. Certainly, if we think this is something that's valuable, I am sure the park board would want to revisit that. They actually, Ralph Rosinski actually mentioned that at the park board meeting, and that was the first I had thought about it. It was just an oversight on my part.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Mr. Crum?
One bean counter issue with this is you'll see on my cert, the expenditures are coming from the various parks capital improvement line items. We have the money in those line items right now, and there is enough money in the parks, in the park fund that they can pay for this. That being said, I would suggest if you pass this that maybe we transfer $46,000 from the general fund to the park fund, because if they do this project without any help from the general fund, it would cause probably some other projects to have to be shelved that could cause some issues on that end. So that would just be something that we talk about in amended appropriations ordinance. But there is money in there. If you choose to do this project without transferring general funds, they just have to cancel some of the other projects to make it happen.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Martin?
Well, I'm certainly willing to, sponsor moving those monies with an amended ordinance, so we want to get that working. That's perfectly fine. I actually thought that's what we were part and parcel deciding today. So, yeah, that's not a problem. I think this is worthwhile. Like I said, nothing would make us more furious than putting $1.8 million in our Blackfoot Commons and then finding that the vandals came to that and we didn't have a clue who to prosecute and we couldn't take care of it. I mean, that'd be infuriating to the CIC, it'd be infuriating to the amount of donors that are putting money in supporting that as well. And so I think it's definitely a worthwhile endeavor. So.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin. Yay. Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Resolution number 37, 2022 passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. For coming.
Okay. Ordinance number 10, 2022. Amending substitute ordinance number 1, 2020, establishing wages for department heads and other non-certified employees and declaring an emergency.
Motion that the rule requiring ordinance to read on 3 separate occasions be suspended. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Martin, a second by Mr. Gates, that the rule requiring orders to be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
That motion passes.
Move the ordinance be taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Roberts for the passage of ordinance number 10, 2022. Discussion? We may say the last tends to be listed on the second page there, that has code enforcement officer with that range of $17 to $27 per hour. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Ordinance number 10, 2022 passes.
Ordinance number 11, 2022, amending ordinance number 3, 2022, annual appropriations and declaring an emergency.
I move that the rule requiring that an ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Roberts for the, that the rule requiring that ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin. Yay. Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
That motion passes.
Move the ordinance be taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Roberts for the passage of ordinance number 11, 2022. Discussion? Mr. Gates.
Would the finance director walk us through this, please?
I would be
Mr.
happy.
Crump.
Thank you. Okay, so this is housekeeping for all of our other resolutions and ordinances tonight. The first 3 line items I have here, the 101 BZI 400 would be wages for the code enforcement officer. And then the following 2, the OPERS and the FICA, would be the associated taxes. So those would fund line items so that we can pay that position. The transfer capital improvement, the 101 TRS 447. So we have two resolutions we really haven't spoken of yet. One is potentially paving Technology Parkway, and that will cost about $315,000. In order to do that, we would move $315,000 out of our general fund into the capital improvements fund, and then you'll see the bottom line there, the 300 SDR 535 street resurfacing would be the expenditure line item, so we can do that project. Just in our, the thoughts for that was our income tax collection has come in a little higher than we expected, and we have a bit of a surplus in the general fund. So that's why the administration suggested, well, actually, Councilman Gates brought it up the last meeting to do some paving. So we can talk more about that at that resolution, but that line item would fund that project if we so chose. The other portion of that transferred capital improvements is $90,000 that would go towards the Marks radios, because due to the lack of inventory and the first vendor having to switch vendors to a different radio, the price has gone up. And so we would transfer more money to the 300 fund for that. And then I have the equipment line item of $90,000, which would get added to the current fund so we could purchase those radios. Additionally, while I'm not here, if we wanted to transfer funds to the park fund, we could add a line item in here, or we could do it the next council meeting with a fresh ordinance, as I'll probably have some adjustments due to inflation anyway that I'll be asking for. So that is up to you guys. But that, sir, is more or less the roadmap of those line items.
Thank you. Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts. Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Ordinance number 11, 2022 passes.
Resolution number 32, 2022, approving the plans and specifications and authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Service to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the 2022 paving project, Phase 2, within the city of Shelby, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
These resolutions be taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Martin for the passage of resolution number 32, 2022. Discussion? Mr. Geis.
I think I've talked to all the council members before, but our administration's plan was on this, as Mr. Gates brought up the last meeting, about putting more money to asphalt. This road is about the easiest we're going to get to pave, not the cheapest, obviously, but with no one water valve, one manhole, and not having to worry about the curb ramps and so forth. They can get in, get out, and I think this would be a good project for a company to schedule late in the year, so.
Mr. Gates.
Mayor, on the attached specifications, I've got a number of inconsequential corrections. I will pass those on to Mr. Geis, and he can make those. None of them, I will assure my colleagues, none of them are of substance.
Okay, thank you for that. And may I say, this has been a can that's been kicked down the road. It's become a 50-gallon drum that's been kicked down the road, and I think we're in a financial position to really do something about this. And I think we want to assure our constituents we have not forgotten about all the other roads. I think all of us drive around town, and for us to say, this one needs resurfaced, and this one, if we could wave a magic wand, we'd do that. But I think if we get this big one out of the road, then we can continue to follow our strategic plan and try to get the worst for the worst. And so we'll be working with all of our council members in that regard. Mr. Martin.
Well, I think it's a matter of, this is probably the only real one we can get done this year.
Correct.
And then also, it's one that desperately needs done, and it's gonna be a heck of a lot more than $315,000 when we actually get around to getting it done. I've heard it said that it's almost to the base, which my understanding minuscule understanding, because that's a bad thing. And so, let's go ahead and get it done. It's something we can actually get done this year, and, it's not in someone's neighborhood per se. It's not, not one of the probably most talked about streets, but if we went to those streets, we'd be able to get those done this year anyways, because of the different curb ramps and stuff like that. Nobody would touch it, and we'd be waiting until 2023 anyways. So I think this is absolutely the right thing to do, and I applaud the administration for bringing it to us in such a timely manner.
I want to thank Councilman Yates for bringing that issue to our attention.
You're very welcome.
Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin. Yay. Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Resolution number 32, 2022 passes.
Resolution number 33, 2022, authorizing the mayor and director of public service to enter into a governmental natural gas aggregation program agreement with a recommended natural gas supplier.
Resolution be taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Robbins and a second by Mr. Martin for the passage of resolution number 33, 2022. Discussion. Mr. Martin.
Based on the testimony, a couple questions. We're actually doing two things in this resolution, right? We're authorizing you to enter into, and then also for something with PUCO, right? Having you sign something?
Yeah, it's like section 2 that you're speaking of? Or no?
No, it says nothing about signing it. I thought he had said that we had to sign something with PUCO as well.
They're attached here too.
I understand they're attached. There's nothing in the resolution stating it is, unless I'm missing something. So I've been known to be blind before, but I see that where the mayor is authorized to enter into that, but not to where you're authorized to sign the thing to PUCO.
The two attached agreements that are here, the customer information agreement and the renewal certificate, those would be required for us to move forward with the new agreement. That's why those are attached to this piece of legislation.
So he's already signed the renewal agreement. I see it now. He already signed it on the 16th of May.
They have been reviewed.
So this is just make sure we attach it. So you're actually not needing this. Something you already did. I understand.
Correct.
Thank you. My apologies for spending time here. Based off of earlier comments, I would like to move to amend to add a new section 2 that the mayor, upon entering into an agreement, will provide in writing to City Council the terms of that agreement as early as possible. And then the subsequent sections.
Second.
Mr. Crum, you're getting this down too, I'm sure, but that the mayor, upon entering into an agreement, will provide to council the terms of that agreement, something like that?
Provide the council in writing the terms of that agreement at the earliest possible time, or something to that effect.
Well, point of order, if the gentleman's making the motion, you should make the motion and not say, and something like that, or something like that. Tell us, the member should tell us what his amendment is.
That the mayor, upon entering into an agreement, will provide to council in writing, continue,
In writing, the terms of the agreement at, within 2 business days.
council in writing the terms of that agreement within 2 business days. Do I have correct? Very good. So we have that motion, and then there's a second. Discussion on that. Now, you want to put an entirely different section in there?
Correct, that'll be a new section 2, and then the subsequent sections would be section 2 will become 3, 3 will become
Okay.
4, 4.
So then in part of that amendment, section 2 will become section 3, and section 3 will become section 4, section 4 will become section 5, as the whole of that amendment, correct? Okay. Everyone understand the amendment that is being proposed? Discussion on that.
Who was the second? I'm sorry.
Any discussion then on that motion to amend? Roll call please on the motion to amend.
Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Barton.
Yay.
That motion to amend passes. Back to the main motion, resolution number 33, 2022. Further discussion? Roll call please.
Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Barton.
Yay.
Resolution number 33, 2022 passes.
Resolution number 34, 2022, authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Safety of the City of Shelby to apply for the 2022 American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, First Responder Wellness, Recruitment, Retention, and Resiliency Grant for retention of full-time current employees and declaring an emergency.
The resolution taken up fast.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Martin for the passage of resolution number 34, 2022. Discussion? Mr. Gates.
I wonder if the fire chief could come forward and tell us what he wants to do with this grant.
Yeah, this one's, it's a long shot. So, I've researched a little bit, talked with Chief Combs. Not even sure we're gonna make it through the first round. But I've done the legwork on it. There's certain criteria. First of all, to replace firemen that we lost during COVID. Well, doing research, we lost one full-time and replaced them. Lost one volunteer and replaced them. The big chain of events where we lost a bunch of people came after the time period. So we don't qualify for part 1. Part 2 was keeping our current employees. It's a 2-year grant. They said you could give up to 10% of a retention bonus, so I figured, okay, it's good for 2 years. Let's say you stick around for 2 years, you can give up to 10% of their base salary with nothing else figured in. So it's simply with the contract, base salary, 10%. There you go. So, that's really, the thing that I regret with this is the volunteers. I don't like to leave them out, but the volunteers don't have a base salary. I don't have, they're paid by the call, so I wish I had something I could figure out. I really can't. So I'd like to include them in on it. Like I said, it's just you turn it in, they'll tell you whether you're going on to the next round or not. That's really about it. Unless you guys have any questions.
I do, but for Chief Combs. Just for background, the chief spoke, this chief spoke extensively about it at the safety committee meeting. Chief Thompson was on vacation. I don't fault him for being on vacation. A bad day of vacation is better than a good day of work, right? So, but the one phrase or one thing this can be for is wellness, and the Chief Combs had talked about wellness.
So one of the issues, we looked at the same grant, the criteria for the grant is very specific as it relates to both retention and recruiting, in that, as Chief Thompson alluded to, you have to have specific numbers. In his case, the numbers stayed the same, but based only on the 2 dates that they determined, and that is the only criteria. We actually had one higher at the end of their date that they considered the pandemic than we did the first date. notwithstanding the fact that we're down many more than that now, for whatever reason, but those numbers don't count. The second part of that grant is for wellness. And when they talk about wellness, they're talking specifically about mental health. So they were very specific, you can't do any building modifications, you can't buy any equipment, they don't want any things. They just want programs that are in place, funded only for a period of 2 years, that will improve the mental health and wellness of the existing staff. So, as Chief Rob can attest, every time a grant comes out, every company and their brother comes out with a program that meets those grant criteria so they can get the dollars. We are currently using 2 software platforms, both of which have developed a wellness program. I have asked for quotes from them for what their wellness program is, which really is an anonymous app. The wellness programs that the criteria, it cannot be used for discipline or the provider that you use for discipline, so we would not be able to use someone that we would seek an opinion on for somebody's psychological health or for hiring. It has to be anonymous, it has to be top down from the chief all the way down to the bottom. I don't have those numbers yet, but the date for submission for this grant is June 17th. And once I get some information from those providers as to how much that grant, how much the app would cost and all the details, then we'll probably be making our presentation for submission for that grant as well.
Thank you. Mr. Gates?
I believe the fire chief is, wants to apply for this under the category of retention.
Yes.
Let me share my concerns with that, is that if we would apply and get this grant for that, it would only apply to the fire department and would not be available for any other city employee. Now, that's through no fault of the chief, because it's meant for first responders. So that's a concern I would have, is that would be a benefit given to, one slice of our city employees and not to everybody. Now, as far as retention is concerned, every city employee, save and except electeds, get longevity pay and have gotten longevity pay for decades. So we have always been rewarding our employees for their retention. So that's a concern I have, is that this is something that would not apply across the board to everyone when those employees stuck out, through the pandemic. And the other might be more of a financial thing. The certification we have here is only for fire. If there's something that the police chief wants to apply for, and I assume these are reimbursement grants, they always are, we don't have certification for that. And we have to have certification in writing by state law. Now, it's due the 17th, what's today? The 17th is before the next council meeting, so some thoughts to consider.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin. Yea. Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Nay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Resolution number 34, 2022 passes.
Resolution number 35, 2022, authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Safety to participate in the state cooperative purchasing plan for the purchase of Motorola portable and mobile radios.
Point of order, Mayor.
Yes.
This resolution and the next resolution, number 36, they are joined at the hip. So I would move that council meet as the committee of the whole to discuss these two resolutions, number 35, 2022, and number 36, 2022.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Martin to go into a committee of the whole to discuss resolution number 35, 2022, and resolution number 36, 2022. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
Mr. Rob.
Yeah.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
That motion passes. We go into a committee of the whole at 8:54.
Okay. On the committee of the whole, we're discussing resolution 35 and 36. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I think the police chief should carry the ball on this, on these.
Feel like the prime minister at Parliament.
Who survived a vote of no confidence today. 41% of the Tories voted against their own prime minister.
I'm just glad I'm not in that position right now as I stand up here. So this is a very complex and nuanced issue that first came to light when, and I believe we discussed it, when the fire department went to Marks. So when the fire department and all fire departments, I believe except for the Mansfield City Fire Department in Richland County, went to Marks, that caused a huge communication gap with us. As a result, over the summer last year, I worked with Councilman Gates and Finance Director Crum, and we shuffled some monies around and found some money and broke this internally down into two projects, although it is one project. So the first project was a $24,000 dispatch upgrade, which gave us the capability of patching and being able to access Marks. It actually installed 2 fire Marks mobile radios onto our Telex system, which is our dispatch software, and 1 law enforcement mobile radio that is attached to that Telex software. That project started almost immediately after that was approved, and believe it or not, that project was just completed 2 weeks ago. Through a number of issues with Vasu Communications, they came in November, they came again in February, and then again about 3 weeks ago I complained that the project wasn't yet done. At the same time, I believe Resolution 6921 passed for a total amount of about $95,000 to purchase mobile and portable, dual band portable radios. Through Vasu, through cooperative purchasing, they are E.F. Johnson radios. So 30 days after that resolution passed, I completed a purchase order, submitted that purchase order to Vasu Communications. About 30 days later, they called and notified me that those radios were now obsolete. They could not get enough of those dual band radios, and I would have to purchase a tri-band radio, but they did not have pricing and did not expect pricing until spring of this year, I believe April. So we tentatively put that project on hold until we could get better pricing. I worked with Mr. Geis to prepare a change order resolution, but we never got that pricing. The pricing we got was actually for different equipment, and we kind of just were taking a stab in the dark and having that legislation prepared in the event we were to do a change order for an increase of about $10,000. On the 17th of May, I got a notification from the Attorney General's office that they were opening up the 2022 burn funding. That's the same grant we used last year to purchase $20,000 worth of Noptic thermal imaging cameras, which are now installed, and the state waived all of our fees. We got that paid for completely, reimbursement grant. The 22 burn funding, they were sure to let us know that radio funding was available. However, as all these grants do, the grant window closed June 2nd. I asked for an updated quote from Vasu on, I think, the 18th of May and received no response. asked again, still received no response. And on the 31st of May, I gave my final plea to them, please present me, I need this, we have to submit this grant by June 2nd. Knowing full well the council wouldn't meet until June 6th, this is just one of those issues I think that I asked for forgiveness rather than permission because time was of the essence. We are eligible for up to $61,000 in grant funding for this project. That is the max based on our department size. I was getting very frustrated through a strange series of events. I was provided with the phone number for a senior account executive for Motorola, not from Bender or BNC or any other company, direct with Motorola. He actually was in Cleveland, drove straight to my office, set up in my office, and gave me a quote that afternoon. And I prefaced that quote with what we already know to be true. Motorola is much more expensive than Kenwood or E.F. Johnson radios. However, in order for us to submit for the funding, I have to have a quote, and that quote has to be within the last 30 days. So I received that quote that day. Sergeant Nolan, we'd already prepped all of the grant documentation with the exception of plugging in that price, and that price came to, I think, $189,000 and some odd change. That also was slightly different because I did add one portable radio. It also, that quote also includes $17,000 worth of encryption programming that we would pay 20% more to do later. So if they come from the factory pre-programmed with that encryption software, it's cheaper than to do it later. The reason we added that to the quote is that many of the talk groups, many of the state agencies, and many of our federal partners, including the National Guard, that are on marks, use encryption at the user group level. If we don't have encryption and we need to talk to them, we can't. So we added that into that quote. The other thing is, the Apex 8000 radios that they are providing us are not dual band, they're not tri-band, they are all band radios. So that portable radio can program any VHF or UHF frequency that we want programmed into that radio. And it is, I guess the way I discussed it with them was, I like Corvettes. I really like Corvettes, but I can't afford a Corvette, so I have to buy a Camaro. That's kind of the difference between Motorola and E.F. Johnson, which is E.F. Johnson was bought by Kenwood, so it's a Kenwood product. I don't want to say that they're any better. You push a button, it talks. I think the chief has E.F. Johnson radios, and he's very happy with those radios. He has Kenwood radios, and he's very happy with those radios. I will say that I have not found a secondary market for Kenwood radios, but there is a very large secondary market for Motorola radios that are refurbished and sit on the system, and they will last sometimes 12, 13 years on the system. So I did, in the interest of fairness, and it's no fault of VASU, they had to wait for pricing changes from April that they had not yet received from E.F. Johnson. They did provide us a quote. Unfortunately, it was both after we had prepared our submission, and it also only included the portable radios, not the mobile radios, and I did a quote for both. So that's really no fault of their own. So that's kind of how we got to this point. I don't know that we'll get $61,000 in funding, but it would be very nice, and I think the way that we've laid out this project and the communications issues that we have, that is the best. The only other thing I will say is that Utilities Office has made a large investment in maintaining their VHF radio systems. We talk to them as much as we need to talk to fire for a number of reasons, from the tornado to snow plowing. We still have to talk to them. We also are dispatching currently for Plymouth. Plymouth neither has an interest or the funding to move to Marks, and they are on VHF. Ontario is still on VHF, and Lexington PD are still on VHF. So we need to be able to do both. There has been no cost since we moved to the new building, there has been no cost to maintain our VHF radio system. So we have not had to dump money in upgrades, changes. It still works, and we're happy to keep that working. It's been very low maintenance. But it is important that we be able to communicate with all of our other areas that we have to communicate with. The only concern that I have that is not included and did not get a quote for, and I've had multiple discussions about it, so this is my caveat when it fails, this is my out. There is a concern about mobile repeaters. So mobile repeaters communicate with that radio, they're in the car, they rebroadcast to make that connection with the Marks tower. When Marks put a new tower co-located on AEP on Hazelbrush Road, which was last year, I believe, the fire chief has been using Marks portables and Marks mobiles,
Couple of years.
and they have had no issue. They did not put repeaters in any of their fire apparatus and have not had an issue. Mansfield PD, and just so you know the cost, they're about $5,000 a piece to put a repeater, a mobile repeater in the car. Mansfield PD spent $5,000 for each car to have mobile repeaters, and I talked to Assistant Chief Bannon last week. They don't believe they've ever used them. They haven't needed to. Now, that's not to say that we won't need them, but our best guess, based on the fire department's experience, the addition of this tower, we're hopeful that we won't need them. And that's pretty much all I can really say about that. But that is the only other concern that I'm worried about. Ontario did move to go to Marks. They spent a lot of money to go to Marks. They are in a different physical, geographic location than we are based on tower distance. They have had to abandon that project temporarily because they have found that they do need mobile repeaters. So I don't think that we're going to be in that position. The only way to tell, I don't want to spend $5,000 a car if we don't need it, and we can revisit that later. We also can still use Simplex and still operate radio to radio without using the tower. So that is the reason for the cost increase and the change, and that's kind of the timeline as best I can present it to you.
Charlie, do you have something? I don't know if I saw Charlie's hand. Do you have something, Charlie?
I'm sorry.
Did you have a question, Charlie?
Oh, no, actually,
Anyone else?
my question would have been, what about dead spots? But
So if I can, real quickly, and I don't want to kind of say things ahead of time, but the fire chief has gone out and done testing, and there are some new buildings in the community that are ongoing with testing. There is I believe it's administrative code that requires, if we do not have communications or we have dead spots within larger buildings, public buildings, we can require them at their expense to add repeaters. There is some ongoing discussion regarding that right now, and that authority to do that really rests with the fire chief. If the fire chief says it's a public safety need, then they have to do it at their expense. So we are checking actually with all of our school buildings to make sure that we know in all of our schools that we can communicate from one door throughout every portion of those buildings, including NC State. So that's also on our mind as well.
Any further discussion on these resolutions? None?
Move the committee of the whole adjourn.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates, second by Mr. Martin to adjourn. Roll call.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Any?
Mr. Rob.
Here.
Mr. Roberts. Mr. Gates.
Yeah.
Mr. Martin.
Yeah.
Mayor votes adjourned at 9:08.
The council comes back into session at 9:08. Consideration of resolution number 35, 2022. Have you read that, Mr. Jones?
Okay, Dave, but I can read one more time just to make sure. Resolution number 35, 2022. Authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Safety to participate in the state cooperative purchasing plan for the purchase of Motorola portable and mobile radios.
The resolution be taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Martin for the passage of Resolution 35, 2022. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Resolution number 35, 2022 passes.
Resolution number 36, 2022. Authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Safety to apply for the 2022 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant.
Resolution taken and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Gates for the passage of Resolution number 36, 2022. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Resolution number 36, 2022 passes. We now come to miscellaneous business. Mr. Gates.
Mayor, Juneteenth is on Sunday, June 19th. I assume they will be celebrating it on the 20th, which normally would be a council meeting. So according to the rule, our next council meeting will be on June 21st.
Correct. Mr. Martin.
Couple things, Mayor. 78 years ago, a bunch of young men ran into literal hell and rushed on Nazi-occupied Europe, and we have a great deal of debt of thanks to those who participated. Then also a note of, I guess, a jubilee. My daughter will be getting married on the 18th, and so before the next council meeting, so I'll take the councilman privilege of being able to congratulate her and her husband to be.
Wonderful. Here, here. Congrats to you as well. Any further miscellaneous? Mr. Gates.
Mayor, I move that council go into executive session for a conference with an attorney for the public body concerning disputes involving the public body that are the subject of pending or imminent court action.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Martin to be in executive session for the purpose so read. Discussion, Mr. Gates.
Mayor, without disclosing anything that we need not disclose, but who do you think should accompany council into executive session?
Mr. Crum and Chief Thompson. And Mr. Eister. Of course.
Well, no, that's a given.
Just make sure, yeah, he does.
So, okay, so Chief Thompson
Mr. Crum.
and yourself?
And myself, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's not foregone conclusion, okay.
Thank you.
Mayor, I would request that if this motion passes, if this motion passed, that you, the mayor, the director of finance, and the fire chief accompany council into executive session.
Perfect. All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
Mr. Rob.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yeah.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Motion passed. We're in executive session at 9:12 p.m.
Maybe you were inviting the an attorney.